Welcome back to Andersen Acres. This is our monthly podcast, Farm Fights, Controversies in the Hobby Farming World. Each month, we take one big, often heated topic from the world of hobby farming, something that usually shows up in your Facebook groups and stuff like that. And today we're diving into a controversial one that makes people angry on both sides. And it's raw milk. Okay? Raw milk, is it safe? Is it unsafe? Should you drink it? Should you avoid it? Should you drink pasteurized instead? Okay, I'm going to start by saying this up front. I don't care what you choose to consume. Drink raw milk, drink pasteurized milk, don't drink milk at all. It's your body, your farm, your fridge. I do not care. Okay? You should drink what is right for you. You should eat what is right for you. In the same vein that I don't care whether you are vegetarian or carnivore or in between. I don't care. Okay? It has no impact on me. What you eat, what you drink is entirely up to you. That being said, I do care about making informed choices. Making choices based on science that are in the best interests of you and your family. Okay? Because here's the thing. Raw milk is inherently more dangerous than pasteurized milk. That's not an opinion. Okay? That's fact. That's science. It is verifiable, provable. Okay? There's so much science that you could just lay out on the table. Okay? To prove that it is 100% more dangerous. Unfortunately, a lot of people simply don't realize the risks they're taking, especially when they're feeding raw milk to their children or giving it to someone who might be immunocompromised. And if we don't know the truth behind something, we can't make an informed choice. Okay? If our head is full of something someone who is such a proponent of raw milk has said, we can't step back and go, okay, but is this the right choice for me, for my kids, for my grandparents? If you are unable to assimilate fact, you cannot make an informed choice, and you can't force it on others because that's not your choice to make either. So I am for informed consent and informed choices. So today we're going to talk about what raw milk is, why people are so passionate about it, what the data actually says, and what the real risks are. Where do those real risks lie? And we're going to do it without hype or fear mongering or judgment. And full disclosure, I use raw milk when I'm making cheese. So I am not a stranger to raw milk. I don't drink raw milk, but that's because I don't drink milk. I do not like drinking milk. In my baking, I typically use pasteurized milk from the store because there's only so much raw milk I can source. And I like to use it for my cheese making, and I'm not going to use it in that's dumb. I'm not going to store it and use it in my baking. I'm going to acquire it and use it immediately in my cheese making. For my baking, I simply use pasteurized milk. So, full disclosure. Okay? But again, we're not going to get into fear-mongering or judgment or hyperbole. We are going to stick to facts. So let's get into it. First of all, what is raw milk? Because some people simply don't know what raw milk is. So we're going to define our terms first, because if you don't define your terms, you cannot appropriately have a discussion about them. So raw milk is milk that has not been pasteurized. Pasteurization is a process where milk is heated to a specific temperature for a set amount of time in order to kill harmful bacteria. That's it. That is all pasteurization does. It doesn't add anything, and it really doesn't take much away. I'm not going to say it doesn't take anything away, because you will hear people tell you, well, pasteurizing doesn't change it at all. Well, heat changes things. No, it doesn't do it by much, okay? And it's certainly not enough for anybody to try to use that as an argument for raw milk, but saying it doesn't change the milk at all is disingenuous and inaccurate. So, raw milk itself. Raw milk goes directly from the animal, mostly cows, but sometimes goats, to a bottle. Okay. Some people strain it and chill it immediately, which should be done. Some people test it regularly, which also should be done, but it's still raw. And that means any bacteria present when the milk was collected are still in that bottle because the bacteria was not killed before it was bottled. And yes, that includes both the good stuff and the bad stuff. The bad stuff being bacteria that can make you very ill. So why does pasteurization exist? Okay, why did it become a thing in the first place? It became a thing because back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, milk was actually a common source of deadly diseases like tuberculosis, typhoid fever, diphtheria, that kind of thing. Children were dying. Adults were being hospitalized. And it wasn't because the cows were neglected or the farmers didn't care. It was because milk, like many animal products, is biologically capable of carrying dangerous pathogens. That's just the way it is. Okay? It's a biological product. It can carry pathogens. It's the way it is. So Dr. Louis Pasteur and others developed this simple heating process. And this heating process could eliminate those bacteria without destroying the milk itself. The results were staggering. Okay? Childhood death rates from milk-related illnesses plummeted. Pasteurization quite literally saved lives. So, I do not tolerate in my circle or when people come into my comments, people talking about pasteurization like it's the devil. It literally saved the lives of children, and that matters. That's the historical context that often gets left out when people romanticize the old ways. We forget that before we figured some stuff out, children died. Okay? And now, my family, not myself, I am not fond of cows. I don't have cows on the property. But my family has raised cattle for beef and milk for generations. And my grandparents and my great-grandparents and their parents boiled their milk because they realized it kept their children safer. Okay? So they always boiled their milk. And boiling the milk before you chill it and refrigerate it is a form of pasteurization. It's not necessarily controlled pasteurization because they weren't using a thermometer. They just knew that heating the milk first and then rapidly cooling it and putting it in the fridge made their children not get sick. And that was a good thing on the farm. We don't want the kids sick. So when we're talking about getting sick from raw milk, what bacteria specifically are we talking about? Well, there's a bunch. The dangerous pathogens that raw milk can carry include, but are definitely not limited to, things like Salmonella, E. coli, and the one that worries me the most is Listeria. Okay? Now, these bacteria and the other bacteria raw milk carries can cause symptoms like vomiting, diarrhea, fever, dehydration, kidney failure, especially in young children. And in the case of Listeria, it can even cause miscarriages in pregnant women. And in some cases, not a whole lot of cases, but in some cases, the result of some of these bacteria, the infections they produce, can be death. Okay? Here's a real number. People who consume raw milk are 150 times more likely to get sick from foodborne illnesses than those who consume pasteurized milk. And to put that into context, think about how few people get sick from pasteurized milk. Almost none. I'm not going to say none because occasionally something happens and there's a problem at a factory or whatever. But almost no one gets sick from pasteurized milk. So when you times almost nothing by 150, you don't get a huge number. But it's still statistically significant. And children under 5 account for the majority of raw milk-related outbreaks and hospitalizations. That's a big deal because children under 5 are precious and they do not have fully developed immune systems. Okay? They simply do not. It doesn't don't get into the, well, if you didn't vaccinate your kids, don't do that. They do not have fully developed immune systems. That is the point of young childhood. They are developing immune systems. But no, children under 5 are the most at risk. Um, and then there's the people who come into the comment sections of these kind of videos and they say, but my milk is clean. Let's talk about the cleanliness myth for a moment. One of the most common defenses of raw milk I hear, and you don't need a defense if you enjoy consuming something. Okay, it's enough to say, I acknowledge that I'm taking a risk, but I'm okay with that risk because I enjoy this product. That's okay. But defending a choice with misinformation, not a good choice. Because I often hear, well, I keep my animals clean, I sanitize my equipment, my milk is tested, it's totally safe. And to be clear, cleanliness matters. Okay? Cleanliness 100% matters. It's an important part of the process, but it's not a guarantee. Cows can shed listeria or salmonella without showing any signs of illness at all. Even one drop of manure near the udder, one lapse in sanitizing, one fly landing in the milk pail, that's all it takes. Okay? And I don't know about you, but no one is perfect. I do not care where you get your raw milk from. I don't care how much you trust the person. No one is perfect. Even if they follow every single procedure, even if everything is always clean, always sanitized, no one is perfect. Okay? At some point, that bottle's not going to be fully sanitized because we all make mistakes. We're human beings. And tests, well, they're snapshots. You might test negative today, but positive tomorrow. And you don't test every bottle. You can be the cleanest, most careful farmer on the planet and still produce a contaminated bottle of raw milk. That's the uncomfortable truth. And that's why I had someone tell me that they got raw milk from a farmer, and this farmer had a really good reputation, and they got sick. Okay, they actually got listeria. And they wanted to blame the farmer. And my first response was, it's not the farmer's fault. You are consuming a product with a higher risk. And is that risk still relatively low? Yes. But if you're going to consume a product with a higher risk, you can't be surprised when you get sick. Okay? It's that way with all foods. It's like eating meat that is rare is a higher risk than meat that is cooked more. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. So it was not the farmer's fault she got listeria. That was not her fault. That was not his fault. That was hers. Okay? And it's not really even her fault. It's just you're consuming a product that contains a slight risk. And that slight risk sometimes manifests. It's just the way it is. Okay? So I want to talk about some raw milk claims. What holds up, what doesn't. Because some of them don't hold up and some of them do. Let's address some of the claims that people make in favor of raw milk. Raw milk has more nutrients. Sort of. Okay? Whenever someone makes this claim, you either get people jumping in and going, no, it doesn't. It's exactly the same as pasteurized. Or you get people who jump in and go, yeah, there's no nutritional value to pasteurized milk. The truth is that, yes, some of the nutrients are damaged from the heating process, but not in any meaningful way. Pasteurization does slightly reduce some heat-sensitive vitamins like B2 and C, but milk is not a significant source of those vitamins to begin with. The important parts, the calcium, the proteins, the fats, and the enzymes, these remain largely intact. And I say largely because is there some damage to the enzymes? Yes. But so unless you're drinking milk for vitamin C, which I doubt, that claim is mostly smoke. That, well, pasteurization destroys the nutrients. Because does it destroy some of them? Yes. For that to make an actual difference in your diet, you actually have to consume more milk than is actually possible. So if you think about it, it's like apple seeds. We've all heard that eating apple seeds will kill you, right? But have you ever accidentally eaten an apple seed? I have. Eaten your apple and swallowed one. Oops. Still here. And it's not that apple seeds can't kill you. They do have a toxic compound in them. It's that in order for the toxic compound in an apple seed to kill you, you have to consume more apple seeds than is practically possible. Like, you're not going to accidentally eat that many apple seeds. So we tell people apple seeds are toxic, so we don't treat them like pumpkin seeds and eat them by the bucket load, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I eat pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds by the bucket load. You can't do that with apple seeds. They're not a snack because they do have a toxic component. And if you sat there eating them by the bucket load, you would get sick and die. However, eating 1 or 2 apple seeds when you're accidentally eating your apple, right? And you're biting and you're, whoa, I think I swallowed an apple seed. You're fine. It's because the difference in the toxicity level, eating a handful after handful after handful of apple seeds and eating 2 is huge. Okay? You have to consume so many of them to hurt you that it's impossible. You're not going to do that. It's kind of the same thing with raw milk. The nutritional difference is so small that unless you are drinking more milk than you are going to consume in a day, okay, you are not going to consume that much milk. Do not tell me you do. You do not. It's not possible for you to drink that much milk in a day. So unless you are consuming more milk than a human can practically consume in a day, it doesn't make a difference. The nutritional difference is so small that your body doesn't care. Okay? So that claim, while slightly true, is mostly smoke because it doesn't actually matter. Then you have the raw milk helps prevent allergies and asthma claim. So there are a few observational studies, particularly in farm children, that suggest lower rates of allergies in raw milk consumers. But those studies are limited and can't prove cause and effect. Okay? It is more likely that the reduced allergy risk has to do with growing up on a farm, exposure to animals and pollen and soil and microbes. It has nothing to do with the milk itself. Because when they try to do more controlled studies, it falls apart. So it's likely that the lesser allergies are not caused by the raw milk. They're caused by just growing up in the country. I mean, my kids don't drink raw milk. I have immunocompromised kids. They don't drink raw milk and they don't have a ton of allergies, primarily because we grew up in the country where they're exposed to everything and they're exposed to all these animals and all that. So it's not probably not the raw milk. Hi. It's chickens, especially little ones. But it's probably not the raw milk. It's probably just growing up on a farm. So the next claim you hear a lot is, if the farm is clean, the milk is safe. No. We touched on this before, but it's worth repeating. Clean doesn't mean sterile. Milk is an ideal environment for bacterial growth, and the presence of pathogens isn't always visible or obvious. Okay? So, I mentioned that I don't care if you drink raw milk, but there are some people who absolutely should never drink raw milk. I'm not going to tell anyone what they can't do, but I will say this. There are groups of people who are at high risk of severe outcomes from raw milk. Young children, pregnant individuals, the elderly, immunocompromised people, and people with chronic illnesses. Okay? In these groups, the consequences of infection can be devastating, including kidney damage, miscarriage, sepsis, or even death. If you're an informed adult who chooses to take the risk, fine, no problem. If you know that you are taking that risk and you choose to take it anyway, I don't have a problem with that. But don't assume it's okay for your toddler just because you handled the milk carefully. It's not the same calculation. Toddlers do not have your immune system. They're not grown up. But you're an adult, right? I'm assuming most of the people watching my videos are fully fledged adults. If you acknowledge the risk and you take steps to avoid that risk, because I do want to talk about being risk averse in a second, then I don't have a problem with it. Because here's the problem with pretending it's not an increased risk. If you don't think it's an increased risk, then there's a really good chance that you're not going to take any steps to prevent getting sick. Okay? If you acknowledge, yes, this is a more dangerous practice than simply pasteurizing the milk, therefore I should do A, B, and C to make sure that I am doing everything in my power to make sure this milk is safe, then you are likely to have a better outcome. When you pretend like raw milk is healthier for you and raw milk is not dangerous at all, then what happens is you cut corners because you don't think it's dangerous anyway. If you really believe it's not dangerous, you would not be taking all those precautions, right? So when you are milking your cow, cleaning your bottles, cleaning your pails, you need to be taking those precautions. So understanding the risk you're taking also helps you mitigate that risk. But if you pretend the risk doesn't exist, you're not going to do anything to mitigate it. Because let's be honest, if you really thought it wasn't risky, you wouldn't be concerned about some of the things you're concerned with when you're processing raw milk, right? When you're collecting it, when you're bottling it, when you're storing it. There are certain things you wouldn't worry about if you didn't think it was any more dangerous, if you didn't think it was more dangerous than pasteurized. If you thought the danger level was the same, you wouldn't be taking certain precautions. You would treat it just like you treat pasteurized milk, but you don't. You are careful. You make sure things are clean. You collect and chill quickly. And all of that, all the things you do when you're collecting raw milk is because you know it's more dangerous. That's okay. It's okay to consume something that has a greater risk. We do it all the time. We just have to be honest about it. Now I want to take a moment to talk about cheese. Okay? I know it sounds weird. We're talking about raw milk, now we're talking about cheese, but I promise it's applicable. So, this confuses a lot of people. Cheese made from raw milk, most of it is not raw cheese. It's not unpasteurized cheese. There's this widespread assumption that if a cheese is made from raw milk, it's automatically unpasteurized. But the truth, that's not how cheese making works. I make cheese. That's not how cheese making works. Most cheese making involves heating the milk, sometimes to temperatures that are high enough to pasteurize it, even if the milk started out as raw. The heating happens as part of the process to prepare the milk for cultures, to create curds, to separate the whey. All of that stuff requires heat. Pasteurization isn't necessarily a single perfect temperature. It's a combination of time and heat. A lot of traditional cheese making hits those temperatures just as part of the process, whether or not it's labeled as pasteurized. So unless a cheese is specifically made to be a raw milk cheese and labeled that way, and most legally made raw cheeses are aged at least 60 days anyway, then it's likely the milk was effectively pasteurized during the cheese making process. Bottom line, just because your cheese came from raw milk doesn't mean you're eating raw milk. Okay, I make cheese out of raw milk all the time. Just because I find that pasteurized milk, I have to add calcium back into it just so that it curdles properly. Because pasteurized milk, it does break down some of those enzymes. And so when you break down some of those enzymes, it doesn't always curdle properly. So if you use raw milk to make your cheese, don't. I'll talk about cheese making another time. But I prefer raw milk to make my cheese. You can do it from pasteurized milk. It's fine. But raw milk, I find, makes a better product. But the end product isn't raw. It's pasteurized because the heat process pasteurizes it. So, my position, plainly stated. Here's where I stand in plain terms. I do not care what you drink. Okay? I'm not trying to convince you that you should drink raw or you should drink pasteurized because I don't care. You want to drink raw milk? That's your choice. You do you. I love that for you. But make it an informed choice. Also, chickens. Okay? But make it an informed choice. Don't rely on hype or nostalgia or influencers with no background in microbiology. Don't rely on those rose-colored glasses where, well, I drank raw milk when I was a kid and I turned out fine. Look at the data. Look at the numbers. Look at the science. Look at real outbreak reports. Don't assume natural means safe, okay? Because it doesn't. Plenty of natural things will kill you, and that includes bacteria and pathogens. These are natural things and they can still kill you. So do not buy into the hype. Make sure you understand that it is a risk. And if you understand that risk and understand the ways you can mitigate that risk, go for it. I am not going to tell you not to do it because nobody should tell you what to eat or drink. I hate when people try to tell people, don't eat sugar, don't eat this, don't drink that. I hate that. I hate that. Nobody should be telling you that. So, a few quick questions and the reason for this Farm Fights episode was a few of the questions I received. So, I'm going to tackle some of the questions, and you probably have some of these yourself. So, one of the questions I received, isn't pasteurization just about controlling small farms? Nope. Pasteurization started before corporate dairy even existed. It was about preventing disease, not consolidating power. Small farms can and do pasteurize, often using batch methods on a small scale. You can pasteurize in your kitchen. Pasteurization is not some weird corporate process that nobody understands or nobody knows what it is. You can 100% pasteurize at home in your kitchen. Okay? It's fine. It's easy. It's easy to do. So it's not something that is about controlling small farms. Small farms are just as capable of pasteurizing as large operations. Another question I got, can't I just test my milk regularly to make sure it's safe? You can test, and you absolutely should. If you are any kind of dairy farmer, raw milk or pasteurized, test. You should if you sell or share your milk, and you should if you consume it yourself. You should know what you're consuming. But testing is not perfect. Bacteria levels can spike quickly and unpredictably. You don't test every bottle, unless you are testing every bottle, but you probably don't. So you should test, but testing's not perfect. Another comment I've received about this topic is, I've been drinking raw milk for years and never gotten sick. Okay, that's great. All that means is that you got lucky. Risk is not a guarantee, it's a probability, and luck runs out. So it's like with a seatbelt. If I tell you wearing a seatbelt is safer than not wearing a seatbelt, and you said, yeah, but I just got back from the store and I don't wear a seatbelt, that doesn't mean not wearing the seatbelt was safer. It means that you took a risk and you didn't suffer the consequences. Because again, risk is a probability, it's not a guarantee. So you survived the probability, but you don't get kudos for that. It's called survivor bias, right? We think that because we did something and survived, it wasn't risky. But we do risky things every day. We jump out of helicopters with parachutes attached to our backs. But people have died doing that. It's a risky behavior. We know it's risky and we do it anyway because it's fun. So just because you survived the risky thing doesn't mean it wasn't risky. Everybody can agree. Skydiving, jumping out of helicopters and planes is a risky behavior. But we can also agree that it's a lot of fun, and for a lot of people, it's worth the risk. You know you're taking that risk. You sign a waiver before you go skydiving saying you accept that risk. It would be a whole lot easier if we had to sign waivers accepting the risk before we drank raw milk, because then we'd be like, I understand there's a risk. And it's important that you understand. So, why do some areas allow the sale of raw milk and others don't? So, where I am, you can't sell raw milk. Okay. And that's mostly because people are really dumb. So some places allow it, most places restrict it heavily, or they ban it completely. So where I am, it's banned completely, but in a lot of areas, you can buy it from farmers if you pick up at the gate. You likely can't ship it. You can't send it across state lines, that kind of thing. But sometimes you can pick it up at the farm. Some states you can't. It varies. Why is that? Because different governments, usually at the provincial or state level, have made different assessments. They all acknowledge it's dangerous, right? And some governments have gone, look, this has gone too far. People are being complete idiots. We're just going to ban it because people have no common sense. And some states have gone, look, we are going to restrict it to the point where you have to actually go out of your way to get it. So you might have to drive to someone's farm to pick it up. That's a lot of states have that rule where you have to go to someone's farm to get the raw milk, meaning you are making a conscious choice, you are making some effort, and what they're banking on is they're hoping that the people who are willing to make that effort are also willing to educate themselves on the dangers of raw milk and not do something dumb. Okay? So mostly those regulations exist because people are actually stupid. If people understood the dangers of raw milk and they treated it accordingly all of the time in all of the places, we wouldn't have a need to be so regulatory about it. But people are pretty dumb. Okay, people like raw milk really can't be transported very far. Again, it has pathogens in it. So if you are that's why in a lot of places you can't transport it across state lines because it has pathogens in it. And the longer it remains on the move, the greater the chance for those pathogens to develop. So there's a reason for a lot of these regulations. And in some areas like mine, they just went, look, it's not worth it. It's just, this is dumb. People are being idiots. And a lot of that in our area has to do with transportation because I'm up in Canada, and people don't actually understand how vast Canada is and how few people we have. So we are so ridiculously spread out that going to get raw milk and then driving it back to my farm would be a trip. Okay? It's not close. You think you're far apart. So if you live in if you live in Europe, everything's close together, even if you think it's not. If you live in the United States, you are still closer together than we are here. You have less square footage and more people. Your things are closer together, including your farms. We are so freaking spread out here that one of the reasons it ends up just governments just go, you know what, it's not worth it. It's just, people are stupid. They think that they should transport it for a 20-hour trip. Literally, I could drive north from my house. I could drive for 30 hours, and I would still be in the same province. I would also run out of road, but that's not the point. We are vast, so they've just decided it's not worth it. Okay? It's the same argument that is sometimes made where, in Europe, they don't refrigerate their eggs and they don't wash them, and in North America, we do. It's because things are more spread out here and we're transporting things farther. So in order to maintain food safety, we wash the eggs and refrigerate them. It's because things are spread out. It's part, and that's not the only reason raw milk is banned here, but it's one of them. It's the transportation. There's a chicken. Oh, multiple chickens. All right. So I am going to wrap up here. Feel free to post your questions in the chat because that is about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. Raw milk isn't the devil. I never said it was, but it's not a miracle either. It's a food product and it has some real risks, and those risks deserve to be known, not swept under the rug in the name of tradition or aesthetics or ideology. So tell me in the chat, in the comments below, have you ever tried raw milk? Did you grow up on it? Did this episode change the way you think about it? Are you going to do a little more research? I'm not saying don't drink raw milk, okay? I'm not saying don't drink it. I'm just saying be aware of the risks. That way you 100% know that you are taking a risk and you can mitigate some of that risk. Because there are things you can do. Leave a comment and I'd love to hear your particular take. I do see all the comments, even if I don't always reply. Thank you so much for joining me for this month's episode of Farm Fights, and we will see you tomorrow.